He woke up early as the first light of dawn filtered through the small window of his modest home. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of wet earth from the night's rain. He stretched, feeling the ache in his shoulders from yesterday's work. But the discomfort was nothing compared to the weight of responsibility he carried. Today would be like any other day in some ways, yet he could sense that something in the air was different, heavier, charged with anticipation. He went about his morning quietly as he always did, brewing a small cup of tea and sitting by the wooden table in the corner. The house was still. His younger sibling was asleep, exhausted from last night's chores, and the old dog that had followed him through thick and thin lay curled up at his feet. He sipped the tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through him, but his mind was elsewhere. He thought about the day ahead, about the people who depended on him, and about the world outside his quiet home, which was not always as peaceful as it seemed. The village around him had always been simple, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's stories. People smiled, exchanged greetings, and helped one another. But beneath the calm surface, danger often lingered. Some days it came in the form of disputes between neighbors, small arguments that could escalate quickly. Other days it came from outsiders, people who saw weakness as an opportunity. He had learned long ago that strength was not only about physical skill, but about awareness, preparation, and courage. He stepped outside, feeling the soft morning mist on his face. The streets were empty, the few children who lived nearby still fast asleep, their laughter yet to fill the air. He walked slowly toward the edge of the village, where the fields opened up to the larger world. From here, he could see the distant hills, the rivers winding like silver threads, and the forests where danger could hide in the shadows. It was a beautiful view, but it was also a reminder that peace was fragile. People often underestimated him. They saw a quiet man, someone who spoke little but listened much, and they assumed he was weak. But those who truly knew him understood that beneath the calm exterior was a spirit that would not bow to fear. He had faced challenges before, small and large, and each time he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. His strength was quiet, unassuming, but unshakable. As he walked through the fields, he noticed signs that unsettled him. The tracks on the ground were fresh, not made by friendly villagers but by strangers. He crouched to examine them, noting the heavy boots, the hurried pace, the way they seemed to circle the village without purpose. Something was coming. He could feel it in the wind, in the way the trees seemed to sway with unease. The thought did not frighten him. It sharpened his focus. He had been preparing for moments like this for years, though he had hoped they might never arrive. Returning home, he began his preparations. He checked his equipment carefully, making sure everything was in order. Every strap, every blade, every piece of clothing mattered. In times of danger, even small mistakes could have grave consequences. His movements were deliberate and precise, each action reflecting years of training and experience. He did not rush because he knew that calmness in the face of chaos was often more valuable than speed. By midday, the village was slowly coming to life. People stepped out of their homes carrying baskets, tending to animals, or walking to the market. They smiled at him politely, unaware of the tension he felt beneath the surface. They did not know what might be approaching, nor did they understand the depth of his readiness. To them, he was simply part of the landscape, a familiar figure who moved quietly and carried himself with a sense of purpose. He made his way to the small community hall, where a few elders gathered to discuss the day's tasks. He joined them briefly, exchanging greetings and offering a helping hand where needed. His presence alone was reassuring, even if they did not realize why. People trusted him, not because he sought admiration, but because they had seen his courage and consistency over the years. His reputation was built on quiet acts of bravery, the kind that often went unnoticed until they mattered most. After the brief meeting, he returned to the edge of the village where he could watch the surroundings more clearly. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher in the sky. The tranquility of the day felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter at any moment. He remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, listening to the sounds of nature and noting every unusual movement. Every rustle of leaves, every distant shout, every shadow mattered. His senses were heightened, trained to notice what others might miss. He thought about the people he cared for, about his family and friends, about the young ones who played in the fields without a care in the world. They depended on him, though they did not fully realize it. His duty was not just to himself but to them, to protect the fragile peace they enjoyed, to face dangers they could not even imagine. The thought steeled him. Fear was natural, but it would not control him. Courage, he knew, was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. By late afternoon, the signs of trouble became clearer. He spotted a small group moving in the distance, their presence deliberate and menacing. They were unfamiliar faces, strangers to the village, and their intent was unmistakable. He observed them carefully, noting their formation, their pace, the way they carried themselves. Every detail mattered. He knew that underestimating them, even for a moment, could be disastrous. He returned home once more, not to hide, but to ensure that everything was ready. He checked the doors, secured supplies, and ensured that the younger members of his household were safe. There was no panic in his actions, only calm, methodical preparation. He spoke quietly to his sibling, giving simple instructions and reassurance. They may not have fully understood the danger, but they trusted him completely. His calmness was contagious, a shield in itself against fear. As the evening approached, he stood at the edge of the village once again. The sky was painted with hues of orange and red, the sun casting long shadows across the land. The strangers were closer now, their movements deliberate, their presence undeniable. Yet he did not hesitate. He had faced adversity before, and he knew that courage was not something that could be summoned in the moment. It had to be cultivated, nurtured over time. He thought about the life he had chosen, a life of responsibility and vigilance. It was not glamorous, nor was it easy, but it was meaningful. He did not seek recognition, only the quiet satisfaction of knowing he had done what was right. He understood the risks, the potential for harm. But he also understood the greater cost of inaction. Some things, he believed, were worth standing up for, even if it meant standing alone. Night began to fall and the air grew colder. He could hear the distant sound of movement, faint but growing clearer. The time had come. He drew a deep breath, centering himself, and allowed his mind to focus entirely on what lay ahead. The moment of decision was approaching, but he was ready. His training, his experience, and his courage were all in alignment. He did not seek glory, nor did he hope for an easy path. He only sought to protect what mattered, and to face the challenges with unwavering resolve. As darkness settled over the village, he felt a strange calmness. The fear that might have gripped another person was present, but it was tempered by preparation and purpose. He knew that the coming hours would test him in ways he could not yet fully imagine, but he also knew that he was not without strength. He had the skills, the knowledge, and the determination to face what was coming, no matter how daunting it might appear. He glanced back at the small home he had left behind, the place that had been his sanctuary, and then at the path ahead. He knew that the true test was not just about physical endurance, but about resilience, courage, and heart. The shadows were growing longer, the distant figures approaching, and the time for contemplation was ending. Soon he would have to act, relying on every lesson life had taught him. And yet, in that quiet moment before the storm, he felt a deep sense of purpose. He was not just fighting for himself, but for everyone who depended on him, for the ideals he believed in, and for the fragile peace of the village he called home. The world could be harsh, unpredictable, and often cruel, but he understood that bravery was the choice to stand when others might flee. And he was ready. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, he moved forward, stepping into the uncertain darkness with confidence, aware that the coming battle would test him in every way. But he would not falter. He would face whatever came with strength, wisdom, and an unbreakable spirit. The quiet warrior of the village was ready to stand alone, fearless and determined against all odds. The night grew darker, and the village was silent except for the occasional cry of a distant animal or the whisper of wind through the trees. He stayed at the edge, his eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. The strangers he had noticed earlier were now closer, their figures clearer in the faint light of the moon. He could see their faces rough and hard, their expressions filled with purpose, and he understood that they were not here by accident. They were coming with intent, and the peace of his village was under threat. He moved quietly through the outskirts, careful not to make a sound that would reveal his presence. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. He had learned that patience was as important as strength. Acting too soon, too rashly, could give the enemy an advantage. He needed to understand them, to watch and learn their patterns, their weaknesses. The night was his ally, and he would use it wisely. From a distance, he could hear them speaking in low tones. Their language was harsh, unfamiliar, and carried an edge of malice. He could not understand all of it, but the tone alone told him enough. They were confident, perhaps even overconfident, believing that a small village would offer little resistance. That kind of arrogance had always been dangerous for those who underestimated him. He had seen it before, and he knew it could be turned against them. He thought about the villagers, most of whom were asleep in their homes, unaware of the danger approaching. They trusted him, though they did not know what exactly he had prepared. That trust weighed heavily on him. It was not just responsibility, it was a promise he had made to himself, a promise to protect them at any cost. He had chosen this path long ago, accepting that courage was often lonely and recognition was not guaranteed. The strangers moved closer, splitting into small groups as they approached the main path into the village. Their footsteps were deliberate, their weapons glinting faintly under the moonlight. He crouched behind a cluster of rocks, observing their movements carefully. Each gesture, each shift of weight, each glance told a story. They were confident, yes, but they were also uncoordinated in some ways, and that could be exploited. He remembered the lessons of his past, moments when he had faced challenges alone and emerged victorious because of careful planning and attention to detail. Strength alone was never enough. Strategy, timing, and awareness were what separated those who survived from those who did not. He adjusted his stance, preparing mentally for the encounter that was inevitable. He did not rush, did not act out of fear or anger. Calmness was his weapon. Suddenly, a small sound broke the night. A branch snapped underfoot, and one of the strangers paused, looking around. He held his breath, frozen for a moment, until they moved on, unaware of his presence. The tension tightened around him like a rope, but he welcomed it. It was a reminder that the moment of confrontation was near. He could feel his heart rate quicken, not with fear, but with focused energy. This was what he had prepared for. He thought about what he would do if the worst happened. If the strangers attacked indiscriminately, if they tried to harm the villagers, he would have no choice but to engage directly. He had faced dangerous situations before, but never on this scale, and never with so many innocent lives depending on him. He knew he could not allow hesitation. Every decision, every movement had to be deliberate. The night stretched on, and the strangers moved deeper into the village's outer areas. He followed them silently, using the shadows and the terrain to his advantage. He noticed the way they were searching, their confidence giving them a false sense of security. He could sense their plan. They intended to intimidate, perhaps even take control, assuming that the villagers would be too frightened to resist. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He remembered the faces of his family and friends, the trust in their eyes when they had relied on him before. That memory gave him strength. He did not need to be reckless or bold for the sake of pride. His purpose was clear: protect, defend, and survive. The villagers' safety was his priority, and he would do whatever it took to ensure it. Every movement he made was guided by that principle. He reached a higher vantage point where he could see most of the area the strangers were covering. They had split further, some moving toward the eastern side of the village, others toward the western. He knew that if he could manage to disrupt their formation and create confusion, he could gain an advantage. It would require precision and timing, but he trusted his skills. The night was his ally, and he had trained for moments like this. A sudden gust of wind rustled the leaves, and he froze for a second, listening intently. The strangers paused too, exchanging glances, their confidence beginning to waver slightly. He realized that even a small, quiet presence in the right place could unsettle them. This was his chance. He moved silently along the edge, shifting from shadow to shadow, staying out of sight but positioning himself strategically. He spotted the first opportunity to act. One of the strangers had strayed slightly from the others, distracted by a small noise. He calculated his approach carefully, knowing that rushing could alert the others. With slow, deliberate steps, he moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. His mind was clear, focused entirely on the task at hand. Every breath, every heartbeat was part of a rhythm that kept him steady. When the moment arrived, he acted swiftly but efficiently. A sudden movement, a precise strike, and the stranger was incapacitated before they could react. The others noticed immediately, but it was too late to understand what had happened. Panic began to ripple through their ranks. They were confident in numbers, but the unexpected presence of a skilled and prepared opponent had thrown them off balance. He did not celebrate or pause. He used the moment of confusion to reposition himself, keeping the advantage. The strangers were regrouping, trying to understand what had happened, and he remained unseen, like a shadow among shadows. He could feel their tension growing, their earlier arrogance giving way to uncertainty. This was a battle of patience as much as skill, and he was not about to make a mistake. He thought about how many times in life courage had come quietly, in moments when others expected fear. This was one of those moments. He was alone, but he was not powerless. Strength, preparation, and determination mattered more than numbers. He could see the way their morale was shifting, the way fear, even small, began to take root. He had faced worse situations in his past, and he drew confidence from those experiences. The strangers tried to communicate with one another, their voices raising slightly, filled with frustration. He stayed hidden, observing every gesture, every indication of weakness. His mind worked quickly, planning several steps ahead. This was not just a physical confrontation. It was a mental one. They had assumed he would be intimidated or caught off guard, but they had misjudged him. Their overconfidence was their first mistake. Hours passed in a tense rhythm of observation and careful action. He moved silently from point to point, ensuring that the villagers remained safe, intercepting threats before they could escalate. He was aware of his own limitations, but he knew his abilities well. Every strike, every maneuver was measured, calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimal exposure. He was alone, but he was not vulnerable. The strangers began to realize that the village was not as easy a target as they had assumed. Their initial confidence wavered, replaced by a cautious approach. He could sense their growing frustration, and it fueled his resolve. He would not allow them to intimidate the people he had sworn to protect. Every step he took, every choice he made, reinforced his position as the unseen guardian, the lone warrior standing firm against overwhelming odds. By the early hours of the morning, the strangers had begun to retreat slightly, regrouping and reconsidering their approach. He did not let his guard down. Knowing that even one mistake could be costly, he remained vigilant, observing their movements, ready to act at the first sign of renewed aggression. His mind was clear, his body prepared, and his heart steady. He had faced danger before, but this night tested him in new ways, demanding patience, intelligence, and courage. He allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, thinking about how ordinary people often underestimated the quiet strength of one who had trained, prepared, and chosen to stand firm. He was that person, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was necessary. He understood that true courage often went unnoticed until it mattered most, and he accepted that reality with quiet determination. As the first hint of dawn appeared on the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold, he could see that the immediate threat had lessened. The strangers were regrouping farther away, unsure how to proceed. He remained at his vantage point, watching, ready to act if needed, but aware that his actions had shifted the balance. He had managed to protect the village, at least for now, using skill, patience, and courage rather than brute force alone. He returned home as the light grew stronger, his movement still careful, his mind still alert. The village was beginning to stir, people emerging from their homes unaware of how close they had come to danger. He ensured that everyone was safe, checking on his family and neighbors, giving quiet reassurance where needed. No one knew the full extent of the night's events, and that was as it should be. The peace of the village was preserved, even if temporarily, because he had acted when it mattered most. Sitting by the window once more, sipping a small cup of tea, he allowed himself a brief exhale. The tension of the night still lingered, but there was a sense of accomplishment. He had faced the threat, had stood firm, and had ensured the safety of those who relied on him. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. Danger had a way of returning, and he would need to remain vigilant, prepared to act again if necessary. The village awoke fully to a new day, the sounds of life returning, laughter and conversation filling the streets. To them, it was a peaceful morning, ordinary and calm. To him, it was a reminder that courage often went unseen, that battles were not always fought in the open, and that standing alone was sometimes the most important choice one could make. He looked toward the horizon, knowing that challenges awaited, but confident in his ability to face them. The sun had climbed high into the sky, casting its warmth over the village, yet the calmness of the morning felt fragile. He moved through the narrow paths quietly, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of trouble. The strangers from the previous night were still nearby, scattered across the hills and woods surrounding the village. Their presence was not just a threat, it was a shadow that lingered, reminding him that the fight was far from over. He paused for a moment near the edge of a small stream, kneeling to splash water on his face. The cool liquid refreshed him, but it also sharpened his focus. He thought about the night that had passed and the skill he had needed to survive it. It was not enough to rely on strength alone. He had learned that even the smallest misstep could have disastrous consequences. Every action had to be deliberate, precise, and informed by careful observation. As he moved through the fields and low hills, he noticed the signs that the strangers were regrouping. Smoke rising in the distance from a small fire, the faint sound of voices carried on the wind, and the tracks left behind all spoke of preparation. They were not done yet. They were coming back stronger and more determined. This time he knew he would have to face them more directly. There would be no hiding in the shadows, no careful ambush from a distance. The struggle was becoming personal, immediate, and unavoidable. He found a small ridge overlooking a clearing where the strangers seemed to be organizing themselves. He crouched behind a cluster of rocks, studying their formation. Some of them were clearly leaders giving instructions, while others moved like soldiers following orders, unaware of the subtle signs of his presence. He took note of their weaknesses, the way some were too confident, the way some reacted slowly to commands, and the way their attention was divided. These observations were crucial. They would guide his next moves. The thought of being alone in this fight never truly frightened him. Fear existed, of course, as it would for any human, but it was tempered by focus and preparation. He had faced challenges before, had learned to rely on his instincts, and had developed a calm that others often mistook for indifference. In reality, every heartbeat, every breath was a calculation. Courage was not the absence of fear, it was the mastery of it. He moved quietly along the ridge, positioning himself for the first decisive encounter. The strangers were confident, but that confidence made them predictable. He remembered the lessons of the past. Patience, timing, and precise execution were more important than raw power. A single well-placed action could change the balance, and he intended to use that knowledge. He did not underestimate the challenge. Each one of them was capable of causing harm, and he respected their skills while remaining focused on his own. As he watched, one of the strangers wandered slightly from the group, distracted by something small on the ground. He saw an opportunity. With careful steps, he approached silently, his movements controlled and measured. In a swift motion, he incapacitated the stranger before they could react, using minimal force to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. The rest of the group noticed the disturbance immediately, confusion rippling through their ranks. Their confidence faltered for a moment, and he used that opening to reposition himself, maintaining the advantage. He could feel the tension building, not just around him, but within himself. His muscles were tense, ready to react, his senses heightened to every movement, every sound. He thought about his family, his friends, and the villagers who had unknowingly depended on him to face this threat. Their safety gave him purpose, and that purpose sharpened his focus. He had prepared for moments like this all his life, yet each encounter carried the weight of unpredictability. The strangers began to communicate more urgently, shouting orders and warnings. Their voices carried across the clearing, but he remained unseen, calculating each step. He knew that if he acted too quickly, he could alert them to his position. If he acted too slowly, they might regroup and overwhelm him. Timing was everything. He moved quietly, staying hidden while assessing their formation and searching for weaknesses. Hours passed in tense observation. The heat of the day pressed down, making every movement more exhausting, yet he remained steady. His mind worked constantly, predicting the next moves of the strangers, preparing for contingencies, and ensuring the villagers remained protected. Each step he took was a balance of caution and calculated risk. He could not afford mistakes, not with so much at stake. He spotted another opportunity when one of the groups separated slightly, chasing what appeared to be a false lead. He acted quickly, using the terrain to his advantage. A sudden movement, a careful strike, and another adversary was neutralized. Panic began to spread among the remaining strangers. They were no longer confident in their approach. Doubt had crept in, and confusion began to set their plans off balance. He did not celebrate. He moved silently, ready for the next moment, fully aware that the struggle was far from over. He remembered the lessons of previous challenges in life. They were not always physical. They were often about endurance, intelligence, and emotional strength. He had faced hardships before, moments when he had been underestimated, moments when he had to rely on his inner courage. Those experiences had prepared him for nights like this, nights where survival depended on calmness, patience, and strategic thinking. As the day wore on, the strangers attempted to regroup and reassess their strategy. He could see the frustration building in their movements, the subtle signs of panic and hesitation. Confidence had given way to fear, and that fear was something he could exploit without being reckless. Every decision mattered, and he moved deliberately, positioning himself to maintain control over the situation without unnecessary exposure. He thought about the villagers again, imagining their faces as they went about their ordinary routines, unaware of the dangers just beyond the hills. They trusted him, even unknowingly, and that trust was sacred. He could not fail them. Every action he took was guided by a sense of duty, a commitment to protect those who relied on him. Strength alone would not be enough. Strategy, precision, and timing were equally important. By evening, the struggle had intensified. He faced more direct encounters, using his skills to intercept threats and protect the village's perimeter. Each confrontation tested him physically and mentally, requiring focus, endurance, and adaptability. He had no room for error, no chance to hesitate. Every move was deliberate, every decision critical. Yet despite the exhaustion, he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his preparation and courage were making a difference. The night brought a different challenge. Darkness concealed dangers both seen and unseen. He used the cover of shadows to his advantage, moving silently, observing and striking with precision when necessary. The strangers were becoming more cautious, but their fear made them unpredictable. He adapted to their movements, staying one step ahead, balancing aggression with caution, strength with strategy. At one point, he found himself in a direct confrontation with a small group of the strangers. They attacked simultaneously, thinking that numbers would overwhelm him. But he had trained for such moments. He moved with precision, using their momentum against them, striking in ways that incapacitated without unnecessary risk. The clash was brief but intense, a test of skill, endurance, and mental focus. He emerged unscathed, his opponents forced to retreat, their morale further shaken. The village remained unaware of the danger at its borders, and he intended to keep it that way. He moved carefully among the outskirts, checking for any signs of lingering threats, ensuring that the paths the strangers might use were watched and controlled. Every detail mattered, the placement of obstacles, the sound of movement, the subtle signs of fear among the attackers. He thought about how often courage went unseen, how quiet acts of bravery could shape outcomes without anyone realizing it. Hours turned into another night, and he remained vigilant. Fatigue pressed against him, but he pushed it aside, relying on focus and determination to carry him through. His body ached, his muscles strained, yet he knew that now was not the time to rest. The strangers were still out there, and even a moment of carelessness could undo everything he had accomplished. He moved with careful precision, staying alert and ready to react at a moment's notice. He reflected on the nature of the struggle he was engaged in. It was not just about survival or victory, it was about courage, honor, and the protection of others. He had chosen this path long ago, accepting the responsibility and understanding the risks. Each encounter, each decision, reinforced the lessons he had learned in life: patience, observation, preparation, and unwavering determination. He drew strength from those lessons, knowing they would guide him through the challenges ahead. As the second night fell, he knew the strangers were planning their next move. They were cautious, wary, and increasingly desperate. He had disrupted their confidence, and that disruption was now his greatest ally. He positioned himself strategically, anticipating their approach, ready to act when the moment came. The balance of power had shifted, and he intended to keep it that way until the threat was neutralized. Even in the darkest moments, he felt a sense of clarity. Fear existed, but it did not dominate him. He understood the stakes, respected the danger, and trusted his own abilities. The night was long, the challenges unrelenting, but he remained steadfast, guided by purpose and experience. He had faced solitary struggles before, but this one tested every aspect of his strength, courage, and resolve. By dawn, the immediate threat had lessened. Though he remained vigilant, he had faced the strangers alone, protecting the village with skill, patience, and determination. He knew the struggle was far from over, but he had proven that courage and preparation could overcome overwhelming odds. He returned briefly to the village, ensuring the safety of his family and neighbors, giving quiet reassurance, and observing the signs of the lingering threat. He allowed himself a brief rest, sitting by the edge of the village and watching the morning light stretch across the fields. The battle had been hard, testing every ounce of his strength and focus. But he knew that he had stood firm, that he had protected those who relied on him, and that his resolve had made a difference. The world could be harsh and unpredictable, but he had faced it with courage and skill, a lone warrior against all odds. The air was thick with tension as night fell again, darker than before, pressing against the village like a heavy blanket. He stood on the ridge overlooking the fields, his eyes tracing the faint movements of the strangers as they regrouped. Their confidence had faded since the last encounter, replaced by frustration and cautious calculation. They were determined to strike back, and he knew this would be the moment that truly tested his strength, skill, and resolve. He adjusted his stance, grounding himself with slow, deliberate breaths. Every muscle was tense, every sense sharpened. The wind carried the faint sounds of distant footsteps and whispers, the rustle of leaves and the occasional snapping of twigs. He did not flinch. He had spent countless hours preparing his mind for moments like this, moments when patience, focus, and courage mattered more than anything else. The strangers moved closer, forming small groups as they tried to circle the village. They were searching for weaknesses, hoping to catch him off guard, and he could feel their anticipation. But he was ready. He had learned long ago that fear could cloud judgment, and he had trained himself to act with clarity even when danger pressed from all sides. He was not just reacting, he was controlling the situation, guiding it with every choice he made. He thought of his family, of the villagers who trusted him without knowing the danger that lurked around them. They had depended on him, and he would not fail. The thought gave him strength, steadying his heartbeat and focusing his mind. Courage, he reminded himself, was not the absence of fear. It was the decision to act despite it. And tonight, he would act with everything he had. He chose a position near the edge of the forest where the terrain gave him the advantage. From here, he could see the largest group of strangers approaching, unaware of his presence. The shadows of the trees and the uneven ground would allow him to strike effectively, using speed and precision to control the outcome. He crouched, his eyes locked on their movements, studying their patterns and noting every opportunity. Suddenly, one of the strangers stumbled, momentarily alerting the others to something unseen. He stayed perfectly still, letting the moment pass, knowing that patience was key. Any rash movement could give him away. He observed carefully, recognizing the fear beginning to creep into their eyes. Confidence was fragile, and he could exploit their growing uncertainty without unnecessary risk. The first encounter came swiftly. A small group approached too close to his position, and he acted with precision. He struck quickly, using the terrain and shadows to his advantage. A well-placed strike incapacitated one of the strangers before the others could react. Panic rippled through their ranks, their formation disrupted. He did not celebrate. He moved silently, ready to intercept the next attack, every motion calculated and deliberate. The strangers regrouped quickly, now aware that they were facing a skilled and prepared opponent. They shouted, their voices carrying a mixture of anger and fear. They tried to coordinate, but the fear of being caught off guard slowed them down. He anticipated their moves, using each hesitation to his advantage. Every moment of doubt in their minds gave him the upper hand. The battle intensified. One group attacked from the left while another tried to flank him from the right. He moved with speed and precision, deflecting attacks, countering with careful strikes, and using every part of the environment to his advantage. Rocks, branches, and shadows became tools in his hands. He was not just fighting, they were reacting to him, forced into a defensive posture because he remained one step ahead. The fight was exhausting. His muscles burned, his breath came in quick bursts, and his mind raced to calculate each move, but he remained steady, every action deliberate, every strike purposeful. He could not allow fatigue or fear to control him. The villagers were counting on him, even unknowingly, and he would not let them down. His courage was fueled by responsibility, by the knowledge that he stood for something greater than himself. In the midst of the battle, one of the strangers made a bold attempt to strike him directly. He anticipated it, stepping aside and using their momentum against them. A quick counter, and the attacker was neutralized, leaving the others to witness his skill firsthand. Their fear deepened, and hesitation slowed their attacks. He had turned the tide not through sheer strength, but through patience, precision, and understanding of the situation. Hours passed in this intense struggle. He moved from shadow to shadow, striking with precision and withdrawing before the enemy could respond. Every encounter tested his endurance, both physical and mental. He felt the weight of the night pressing down, the fatigue pulling at his body, yet his mind remained sharp. This was the moment he had prepared for all his life, the true test of his courage and resilience. The strangers tried to regroup for a final coordinated attack. They were desperate now, aware that their confidence had been shattered. He observed their planning, noting their hesitation and uncertainty. Even in desperation, they were dangerous, but he had learned to read fear and overconfidence alike. He positioned himself strategically, waiting for the perfect moment to act. Timing was everything. When the final wave approached, he moved with decisive action. Every step, every strike, every dodge was executed with skill honed through years of training and experience. The attack was intense, but he maintained control, using their momentum against them and exploiting their hesitation. One by one, the strangers were incapacitated or forced to retreat. The clearing was littered with signs of struggle, but he remained unscathed, his determination unwavering. The battle reached its climax when the last two remaining adversaries charged together. He anticipated their movements, sidestepped with precision, and used a combination of skill and environment to neutralize them. The fight was brief but intense, testing every aspect of his strength, strategy, and endurance. When it was over, the attackers lay defeated, and he stood alone, victorious yet fully aware of the cost of vigilance. Silence returned to the village, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant calls of night animals. He remained still for a moment, catching his breath, listening for any remaining threat. There was none. The immediate danger had passed, and he had stood alone, facing overwhelming odds, and emerged victorious. His body was tired, every muscle aching, yet his mind was clear, his spirit steady. He thought about the lessons of the night. Courage, patience, and careful preparation were as important as strength. He had faced the strangers not with reckless aggression, but with intelligence and resolve. Each movement, each strike had been deliberate, guided by experience and a clear sense of purpose. Victory was not just survival. It was proof that courage and strategy could overcome even the greatest challenges. The village remained unaware of the full extent of the struggle. To them, it was a quiet morning, ordinary and calm. He would keep it that way. Heroism, he understood, often went unseen. True bravery was not about recognition or praise. It was about standing firm when it mattered most, about protecting those who could not defend themselves. He had done that, and that was enough. He returned briefly to the village, checking on his family and neighbors, ensuring that everyone was safe. The relief in their eyes, even without knowing the danger that had passed, gave him a quiet satisfaction. He had fulfilled his duty, protected those who depended on him, and proven that courage could withstand overwhelming odds. Yet he knew that vigilance was never ending. Danger could return, and he would need to be ready. Sitting at the edge of the village, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The night had been long, exhausting, and filled with danger, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more certain of his purpose. He understood that true strength was not just in the body, but in the mind and spirit. It was in the calmness under pressure, the focus in chaos, and the courage to act when it mattered most. He looked toward the horizon, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to light the sky. The battle had been won, but the world remained unpredictable, full of challenges that required constant vigilance. Yet he felt ready. His preparation, experience, and courage had carried him through the night, and they would continue to guide him in the days to come. In that quiet moment, standing on the ridge with the village behind him and the rising sun ahead, he understood something profound. True courage was not measured by the number of battles won, but by the willingness to stand alone, to face fear without faltering, and to protect what mattered most despite the odds. He had done that, and that alone gave him a sense of peace, even amid the exhaustion and lingering tension. The village would awaken to another day, unaware of the trials that had passed in the darkness. But he would remember. Every movement, every decision, every moment of fear and focus would remain etched in his memory. He had faced the ultimate test of skill, courage, and endurance, and he had prevailed. Standing alone against overwhelming odds, he had protected his home, his people, and his sense of honor. The wind carried the sounds of life slowly returning to the village. The chatter of neighbors, the calls of children, and the quiet rustle of animals moving through the fields. To anyone watching, it was just another peaceful morning, but he knew the truth. The night had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and demanded everything he had to offer. And he had stood firm, unwavering, a lone warrior against all odds. He allowed himself a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the rising sun on his face, and a rare smile touched his lips. The battle had been won, but it was the courage, the preparation, and the resolve that had truly mattered. These were the things that would carry him forward, through any challenge the future might hold. And with that thought, he turned back toward the village, ready to face whatever came next, standing tall, fearless, and unbroken. The morning sun spread its warm light across the village, casting long shadows on the narrow paths and fields. The air smelled of fresh earth and the quiet scent of smoke from cooking fires. The village had returned to its usual rhythm, children laughing as they ran along the streets, neighbors greeting one another with smiles and nods, and animals moving calmly about their daily routines. To any outsider, it was an ordinary day, peaceful and serene. But for him, the quiet carried a weight, a reminder of the night that had tested him more than ever before. He walked slowly through the village, observing everything with careful attention. Every detail mattered, every sound, every movement. He had spent the night on alert, facing dangers that others could not even imagine. And now that the immediate threat had passed, he allowed himself to reflect on what had occurred. The strangers had been defeated, their confidence shattered, but he knew that peace was always fragile. Vigilance, courage, and preparation were not just for emergencies, they were a way of life. He checked on his family and neighbors first. They greeted him warmly, unaware of the danger that had lurked so close to their homes. He smiled quietly at their faces, feeling a sense of relief mixed with exhaustion. Protecting them had been his responsibility, and now that it was done, he could finally allow himself a brief rest. Still, he remained alert. The world had taught him that even a moment of carelessness could lead to disaster. As he moved through the village, he noticed the subtle changes brought by the night's events. Footprints in the mud, broken branches along the edges of the fields, and the faint signs of disturbance near the hills were evidence of the struggle he had faced alone. The villagers would likely never understand the full scope of what had happened, and that was fine. True bravery, he believed, often went unseen, unnoticed, and uncelebrated. The reward was not recognition. It was knowing that he had done what was right. He paused near the edge of the village, looking out toward the hills where the strangers had retreated. The sun glinted off the distant trees, casting shadows across the slopes. He thought about how fragile confidence could be, how easily fear could spread even among those who believed themselves strong. The night had shown him that courage was not measured by numbers or weapons, but by resolve, focus, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. Sitting on a large rock at the village's boundary, he allowed himself to think back on the events that had unfolded. The first signs of danger had been subtle, almost imperceptible, but his training, experience, and awareness had allowed him to notice them. He had spent hours observing, waiting, calculating, and acting at the precise moments necessary. Every choice, every movement, every strike had been deliberate. He had faced the strangers alone, yet he had remained in control, turning their own overconfidence against them. The memory of each encounter replayed in his mind. The way he had moved through the shadows, striking when opportunity arose and retreating before they could respond. The way he had used the terrain to his advantage, the way he had anticipated their actions, and the way his mind had remained calm even as his body burned with exertion. Each memory was a reminder of how much courage required, not just strength but intelligence, patience, and resilience. He thought about the villagers again. Most of them had no idea how close they had come to danger. They had gone about their lives, trusting that everything would remain safe. That trust was sacred to him. It had guided his actions, strengthened his resolve, and reminded him why he fought. Protecting others was never easy, especially when facing overwhelming odds, but it was a responsibility he had willingly accepted. The thought of letting them down had never crossed his mind. As the morning unfolded, the village slowly returned to its daily rhythm. The sounds of life filled the air, the laughter of children, the chatter of neighbors, the rhythmic hammering of tools in workshops. He moved among them quietly, ensuring that everything remained peaceful. He spoke briefly to a few elders, exchanging simple greetings, offering quiet reassurance. His presence alone seemed to calm those around him, even if they could not understand why. They trusted him because he had proven himself through countless small acts of courage and responsibility. And now, through the night's extraordinary struggle, he allowed himself a moment of solitude near the river that ran alongside the village. The water flowed steadily, reflecting the sunlight in gentle ripples. He dipped his hand into the cool current, letting it run through his fingers, and felt a rare sense of calm wash over him. The river had witnessed many quiet moments in his life, and today it seemed to reflect his own sense of endurance and strength. The danger had passed, but he knew the lessons of the night would stay with him forever. As he stood by the riverbank, he thought about the choices he had made. Every decision had mattered. Every strike, every movement, every calculation had contributed to the safety of the village. He had been alone in the struggle, facing an enemy that seemed overwhelming, yet he had persevered. The experience reminded him that courage was not about avoiding fear, it was about facing it, understanding it, and acting despite it. The villagers went about their daily work, unaware of the vigilance that had protected them. Children played in the fields, their laughter echoing through the air. Farmers tended to their crops, and neighbors exchanged greetings. The peace was genuine now, the kind of calm that comes after a storm has passed. He moved among them, helping where needed, offering quiet guidance and ensuring that nothing had been overlooked. Every small action mattered, even after the immediate danger had ended. He reflected on the broader lessons of the night. Life was unpredictable, and threats could emerge without warning. Strength alone was rarely enough to overcome challenges. Awareness, preparation, intelligence, and patience were equally important. He had relied on all of these, and they had guided him to success. The night had tested him physically, mentally, and emotionally, and he had endured. That endurance was not a matter of pride. It was a matter of duty. By midday, he found himself near the central square of the village, observing the rhythm of daily life. He noticed the subtle ways people supported one another, small acts of kindness and cooperation that often went unnoticed. These acts, he realized, were a quiet reflection of the same courage and determination that he had exhibited during the night's struggle. The village survived not because of luck alone, but because of the strength of its people and the courage to protect and care for one another. He allowed himself to smile faintly at the thought. Courage could be quiet, invisible, and uncelebrated, yet it was powerful. It did not always take grand gestures or heroic displays. Sometimes it was the steady vigilance, the careful attention, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. He had faced overwhelming odds, and now he understood that courage was as much about heart and mind as it was about skill. Even as he moved through the village, he remained mindful of the future. Danger could return at any time, and he could not afford to be complacent. Preparation and awareness were lifelong practices, not just tools for immediate survival. Yet he also understood the value of balance. Rest was necessary to maintain strength, reflection necessary to maintain clarity. The night had been intense, but it had also reaffirmed his understanding of what truly mattered. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, he returned to the ridge where he had faced the strangers. The field stretched out before him, bathed in golden light, calm and peaceful once more. He stood silently, thinking about the night, the challenges he had overcome, and the lessons he had learned. The village was safe, at least for now, and that knowledge brought a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had stood alone, faced overwhelming odds, and protected those who could not protect themselves. He considered the human qualities that had guided him: patience, observation, courage, and empathy. These were as important as strength or skill. The villagers depended on him, not only because he was capable of defending them, but because he cared. That care, that willingness to act despite fear, was what had made the difference. True courage, he realized, was always rooted in responsibility and compassion. Night fell again, but this time it was calm, peaceful, and without threat. He walked slowly through the village, ensuring that everyone was safe, checking that nothing had been overlooked. He paused at the homes of neighbors, offering quiet words of reassurance, and continued on his way, alert but at ease. The danger that had pressed so heavily upon him was gone, and the village could enjoy a day of peace, unaware of how close they had come to harm. Sitting alone by the edge of the river once more, he allowed himself a deep breath. The events of the night had left their mark, but they had also reaffirmed his purpose. Courage, strength, and skill mattered, but so did patience, empathy, and careful observation. He had faced overwhelming odds and had emerged not only unbroken but wiser. The experience would stay with him, guiding him in future challenges, reminding him of what it meant to stand firm in the face of danger. As the moon rose over the village, casting a silver glow over the fields and rooftops, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The battle had ended. The village was safe, and he had proven to himself the power of resilience, courage, and determination. He had acted with purpose, skill, and heart, and that was the true victory. Recognition was unnecessary. He did not seek it. The knowledge that he had stood firm when it mattered most was enough. He remained by the river, watching the stars appear one by one, the quiet of the night soothing yet full of reflection. The village slept peacefully, children dreaming, families resting, unaware of the struggle that had taken place under the cover of darkness. He had ensured their safety, faced danger alone, and proven that courage, preparation, and determination could overcome overwhelming odds. And as he sat there, alone but unbroken, he understood the truth that had guided him throughout his life. The strongest warriors are not always the loudest or most celebrated. They are those who act with purpose, who face fear with resolve, and who protect others even when the world does not see or acknowledge their efforts. He had done that, and in doing so, he had ensured that the village, his home, would continue in peace and safety. The night carried a quiet promise, a sense of hope and resilience. He stood ready to return home, but aware that life's challenges would continue. Yet he was ready for them. His courage, patience, and determination had been tested and proven. He had faced the ultimate test, standing alone against all odds, and he had emerged victorious. The village was safe, the people were protected, and he had honored the responsibility he had chosen to carry. In the stillness of the night, he walked back toward the village, confident and steady. The stars shone above, silent witnesses to the struggles and victories of the day. He had faced danger, acted with courage, and protected those who depended on him. And as the village slept peacefully beneath the night sky, he knew that he had fulfilled his duty not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. He had stood alone, fearless and determined, and in doing so, had shown the true power of courage, preparation, and heart. The night was over, the battle won, and the village was safe. And he, the quiet warrior, had ensured that peace would endure, at least for now.